By the time the men kicked open the back door of Mercy Vale's glass shed, she had already lifted the last bottle from the annealing ash with bare hands wrapped in wet cloth, and the skin of her palms stung like she was carrying 2 coals from hell. Behind her, the furnace breathed hot and steady. In front of her, through ribbon smoke and moonlit dust, 3 silhouettes filled the doorway in hats broad enough to hide bad intentions. Mercy did not turn all the way around. She only slid the bottle into a flour sack at her feet and said, "If you mean to break something, be kind enough to choose what you can afford." That got a laugh from the one in the middle. It was a thin, mean sound. "Mr. Pritchard says you've had custom besides his." Mercy reached for the iron rod cooling on the bench. "Mr. Pritchard says a great many things when he's afraid." The scarred man on the left stepped toward her. "He ain't afraid of a bottle widow." "No," Mercy said. "He's afraid of what honest people put inside one." He lunged for the sack. Mercy swung the rod low and hard. It cracked against his wrist. He cursed, stumbled, and the bottle inside the sack knocked softly against another hidden underneath the bench. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, on a porch swing, under a blanket, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We like knowing who's riding with us." The second man came around the table. Mercy snatched the sack and backed toward the furnace, heat pressing against her spine. If they rushed her there, they would all burn. The one in the middle finally stepped into the light. Caleb Dunn, foreman to Ezekiel Pritchard, land baron, moneylender, and the kind of man who could make half a county lower its eyes without raising his voice. "Pretty work," he said, glancing over the shelves of amber and green glass. "Shame if a stray elbow taught it how to shatter." Mercy kept the sack in one hand and the rod in the other. She was broad through the shoulder and hip, with arms built from years of lifting sand, casks, and iron molds. Men had called her heavy since girlhood, as if weight were a failing. Tonight that weight kept her planted. "Say what you came to say." Caleb's gaze dropped to the sack. "Mr. Pritchard believes some things intended for his keeping may have been mislaid. Then he should search his own house." He smiled. "My employer is a generous man. It troubles him when gratitude turns slippery." Mercy thought of the men Pritchard had ruined by extending credit with one hand and taking deeds with the other. "I don't owe him gratitude," she said. "Only payment. And I paid every cent for this shed. That paper says so today." Something cold moved under Mercy's ribs. "Get out." He tipped his head toward the scarred man, who had found a revolver. "We can leave civil, or we can leave instructed." Mercy's eyes went to the gun, then to the back window. Too small for her. Big enough for a sack. A horse snorted outside. All 4 of them heard it. Caleb half-turned. Mercy pitched the sack through the open window. It vanished into the dark with a thud in the weeds. The scarred man swung the gun back toward her just as another voice came from the yard, quiet as boots set down in church. "I wouldn't do that." A man filled the doorway now behind the 3 of them, rifle leveled, hat brim shadowing his eyes. Dust ghosted his coat. He looked plain in the way dangerous men often do when they are tired of being noticed. Caleb did not startle. "You're a long way from your jurisdiction, Marshal." Not a marshal anymore. Mercy had never seen him before, but the room steadied around him. The scarred man didn't lower the pistol, but the hand holding it seemed to remember tremor. "What are you, then?" Caleb asked. "A man who heard glass break from the road and came to see who was making the noise." Caleb studied him, then Mercy, then the window. In that silence, Mercy understood 2 things. Pritchard had not sent these men only to frighten her, and whatever had gone missing, he could not afford to lose it. "This isn't over," Caleb said. "It surely is for tonight," the stranger replied. Caleb backed toward the door and signaled his men out. One of them spat on Mercy's floor. Another knocked 2 cooling glasses to the dirt where they burst like ice under a boot. Then they were gone. Only when the sound of horses faded did Mercy realize how hard she was breathing. The stranger lowered his rifle. Up close, he had a white seam through one eyebrow and the face of a man who had once been handsome and then decided it was nobody's business. "You ought not stand so near that furnace when you're shaking," he said. "I'm not shaking. You are." Mercy almost told him to leave. Then she looked through the window into the weeds where the sack had landed and saw only darkness. "Help me find it." He glanced at the broken glass, the hot mouth of the furnace, the open door. "What did you throw?" "The reason they came." He said nothing else, just stepped outside with her into the cold night. The moon sat thin over Black Mesa, silvering the sage and wheel ruts. Mercy found the sack by sound before sight, a tiny clink when her boot brushed canvas. The stranger lifted it with surprising care. Inside were 3 bottles wrapped in old shirts. He unrolled one against the moonlight. It was green glass, thick-bottomed, ordinary at first glance except for the bubble caught near the neck, shaped almost like an eye. "Whiskey?" he asked. "Not unless whiskey has taken to writing." He looked closer. Sealed in the hollow center, rolled tighter than a cigar, was a strip of paper. "My name's Mercy Vale," she said. "If you're about to decide whether to turn me in, I'd rather know your name first." Jonah Creed. The name stirred memory. Old law posters. Trail talk. A deputy federal marshal who had left the work after fever took his wife and little boy. Grief left the same look on everybody. Jonah tucked the bottle back into its shirt. "Turn you in for what?" "For keeping secrets in glass." Mercy swallowed cold air. "Pritchard uses my bottles. Says my seals keep whiskey from souring in the heat. Sometimes his clerk brings notes to hide in the bases or necks. Names. Figures. Deed numbers. I was meant to make them where no ordinary eye would catch them." "Why tell me?" "Because tonight they came for these. And because the last note cracked in cooling. I had to break the base and reset it. I saw enough before sealing it again." "Enough of what?" "Proof he's taking land with forged debt and burying the men who object." Jonah looked toward the road where Caleb and the others had gone. "How many bottles?" "Over 2 years. More than 30. Hidden in crates of whiskey sent between Pritchard's ranch, the bank in Dry Creek, and Judge Bellamy's office." "That's a trail. It's also hanging if I speak without evidence." "Where are the rest?" "Some broken. Some gone. 3 I kept back when I started to understand. One has account numbers. One names a surveyor paid to change boundary lines. The last lists 2 men who disappeared in spring." She stopped. "And one more name." "Whose?" "My husband's." The word came out flat. Eli had died 14 months earlier under a wagon on Pritchard's North Road. That was the story, but Mercy had never believed it. "He learned something," she said. "Now Pritchard thinks I learned it too." Jonah handed her the sack. "You can still walk away." "Walk where?" "If I go, he follows. If I stay quiet, he owns this town until he dies praised and comfortable." She looked up at Jonah. "I threw the only chance I've had in a year." He let out a breath like a man hearing a gate close behind him. "Then we don't leave them in your shed." He packed the bottles into his saddlebag beneath a blanket roll. His movements were efficient, but his left hand lagged a fraction behind the right. Old injury, Mercy thought. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I own a horse, don't I?" Wasn't asking about the horse. Mercy mounted without using the stirrup just to answer him. They took the wash north instead of the main road. Jonah rode ahead and checked every ridge before waving her on. That caution should have unsettled her. Instead, it made room in her chest for the shape of being less alone. At an abandoned line shack in Cedar Draw, Jonah lit a hooded lantern and unwrapped the bottles one by one. The first held a folded ledger. The second held survey references and parcel marks. The third held names. Eli Vale, Thomas Reed, Samuel Pike, paid in full for removal. Mercy stared until the letters blurred. She had not cried at Eli's burial, nor when Pritchard spoke kindly over the grave he had paid to fill. But now, in a lined shack with the lantern smoking and a near stranger reading her husband's death as an entry no different from a feed bill, grief moved in her like thaw water breaking a dam. "That man sent flowers," she said. Jonah laid a clean handkerchief beside her without trying to put it in her hand. Men like Pritchard always prefer the part of themselves that gets witnessed. Mercy picked up the handkerchief at last. "You talk like a lawman." "I talk like a man who was slow to learn." "Learn what?" "That evil don't always come at you shouting." By dawn they had a plan thin enough to see light through. Dry Creek lay 20 miles east and had a circuit clerk honest enough to fear God more than Pritchard. If they could get the bottles and copies of the notes to her, then reach the territorial prosecutor in Santa Fe, Pritchard's friends in Black Mesa could not bury the thing so easily. Mercy looked at the 3 bottles laid out like church relics on Jonah's blanket. "What would you have done in my place? Kept quiet and lived, or opened the glass and risked every last thing?" That is the kind of question that sits different depending on who's listening. If you'd been in Mercy's place, what would you have done? Would you have trusted a stranger with a rifle and grief in his eyes, or buried the truth and tried to survive it? Tell us in the comments. There's no small answer to a thing like that. Jonah rolled the bottles back up. I did keep quiet once, he said. Cost people I loved. I don't recommend it. They rode at first light through pinyon and scrub oak, keeping to dry creek beds where hoofprints blurred in gravel. By noon, dust coated Mercy's tongue. Jonah halted only once, at a spring no wider than a washtub, and listened before he drank. 2 miles from Coyote Gap, Jonah raised a fist. The pass ahead cut narrow between red bluffs. Jonah slid from the saddle and touched the dirt where the trail bent. 3 riders came through fast, he said. Shod bay, lame gray, gelding with a chipped left hind shoe. The men from my shed? The lame gray says yes. Backtrack. 2 open behind us now. We go through quick. If shooting starts, ride for the cottonwoods on the far side. And you? I'll manage. That irritated her enough to burn away fear for one useful second. I didn't ask whether you'd manage. His mouth almost changed shape. Ride anyway. They entered the pass single file. 10 yards in, a shot cracked from the rocks. Mercy's mare reared. Jonah shoved his horse broadside to block her. A second shot rang and splintered stone near her knee. Then Caleb's voice came down from above, smooth as oil on water. Set the bags down, Creed. You can still limp away with your hide. Jonah fired toward the ridge. Dust spat up where a hat brim had been. Mercy, he said without looking back, cottonwoods. Now, she should have ridden. Instead, she dragged the shotgun from her saddle boot. Caleb's scarred man rose from behind a boulder on the left. Mercy fired. The blast kicked her shoulder numb. The man dropped out of sight with a yell. Then all sound broke loose. Rifles. Horses screaming. Stone chips stinging skin. Jonah dismounted and used the horse as cover, shooting one-handed while his left arm hung stiff. Mercy crawled behind a slab of red rock, fumbled for more shells, and lost half of them in the dirt. A bullet cut through the braid at the nape of her neck and sent a rain of hairpins down her collar. Mercy, Jonah shouted. She looked up just in time to see Caleb descending the bluff on foot, revolver drawn, neat as a banker arriving for supper. He saw her see him and smiled. Your husband begged uglier. The world narrowed to that sentence. Mercy rose before fear could catch her. Caleb fired. The bullet tore through her sleeve. She kept coming, shotgun empty in her hands like a club. Caleb stepped aside from the swing and caught the barrel. That's enough, he said. Then Jonah hit him from the side. The 2 men went down in dust and fists. Caleb's revolver flew. Mercy dove for it, as another shot snapped over her back. She rolled, cocked the pistol, and fired toward the ridge. The 3rd gunman vanished backward. Below her, Jonah and Caleb struggled in the red dirt, Caleb driving for Jonah's injured arm, Jonah gritting out breath instead of sound. Caleb got a hand on Jonah's throat, and Mercy understood something all at once. The men in Black Mesa had spent years looking at her body and seeing only insult. Too large, too solid, too much woman in the doorway. They had never once considered what weight could do when it chose a direction. She threw herself onto Caleb's back. All of her. All the years of being called burden. All the strength built from furnaces and casks and grief. Caleb lost balance. Mercy's forearm locked under his chin while Jonah twisted free. Caleb clawed at her wrists, choking curses, but Mercy only held tighter. You should have let widows alone, she said into his ear. Jonah seized Caleb's gun from the dirt and pressed it beneath his jaw. Done. Then the scarred man, blood soaking his sleeve, staggered up from behind the rock with a knife in his good hand. Caleb smiled through strangled breathing. He knew Jonah could not shoot him and the knife man both. Mercy made the choice first. She released Caleb with one arm, snatched the empty shotgun from the dirt, and swung the butt into the scarred man's temple. He dropped where he stood. Jonah drove Caleb face down and bound his wrists with rawhide from a saddle strap. Then he sat back hard on one knee, face gone gray. Mercy picked up the bottle-filled saddlebag with shaking hands. All 3 had survived. They reached Dry Creek at dusk with Caleb tied to his own saddle horn like spoiled freight. The court clerk was a widow named Agnes Shaw who wore spectacles on a chain and ink on the side of her smallest finger. Her office smelled of paper, lamp oil, and dried lavender. She read the notes from the bottles twice, then a 3rd time after seeing Eli's name. If this enters the record, she said, there is no taking it back. That is the general hope, Mercy replied. Agnes stamped each copied sheet with the county seal so hard the desk jumped, then sent her nephew for Sheriff Tom Bledsoe, one of the few men in 3 counties who disliked Pritchard more than he feared him. While they waited, Mercy washed blood and dust from her hands in a basin by the stove. Jonah sat in the corner while Agnes stitched the flesh above his elbow where a buckle had torn it. "Your turn," Agnes told Mercy. "I'm all right." Jonah glanced at the hole in Mercy's sleeve. "You're bleeding." "It's a scratch." "Mercy." Nobody had said her name like that in a very long time. Not as command, not as pity, just as if her body belonged among the things worth tending. She sat. After Agnes bound the wound, evening settled quiet around the office. Outside, cattle bells knocked softly, and somewhere farther off a piano missed 2 notes and found the third. Jonah spoke into that quiet. "My wife's name was Clara." Mercy turned. "I was chasing a bribery case tied to a rail contract," he said. "Knew a judge was paid off. Knew a witness was frightened. Thought I had time. The witness talked to save himself. The men I was after couldn't reach me soon enough, so they found my family on the road out of camp." Mercy felt the room pull tighter. "I'm sorry. So was everybody. Didn't bring them back either." He looked at the bottles on Agnes's desk. "Now I keep moving so I don't learn how empty a place can get when you stay in it." Mercy looked at her bandaged arm, then at the glass catching lamplight. Eli used to say glass is only sand that survived being ruined. She met Jonah's eyes. "I think people might be much the same." Something gentled in his face. He crossed the room, slow enough to stop if she wished it, and drew a small pewter horse on a leather cord from his pocket. One leg was bent. "My boy carried this. I've kept it hidden so long I forgot it once belonged to a hand smaller than mine." "Why show me?" "Because I reckon you know something about carrying the dead until they crowd out the living." She opened her palm. Jonah laid the little horse there. "If this story is moving you, you are exactly who it was written for. And if you're feeling that ache in your chest right now, a like and a subscribe is how you tell us to keep bringing stories like this home." Mercy closed her fingers around the token. "I don't want to be brave anymore," she admitted. Jonah leaned one shoulder against Agnes's desk. "That's fortunate. Brave is mostly what folks call it after the danger's over. During, it just feels expensive." She laughed through the threat of tears. "That may be the truest thing I've heard in a year." A knock came at the door. Sheriff Bledsoe entered with dust to his knees and his hat crushed oval in both hands. By the time Agnes finished laying out the papers, he had gone from skeptical to pale. "Judge Bellamy's in on it," he muttered. "Bank too, likely." Bledsoe looked to Jonah. "If I arrest Dunn, Pritchard will have 6 armed men at my jail by sunup and a church sermon about civic misunderstanding by noon." "Then don't take Dunn to jail," Jonah said. "Take him to the square. Ring the fire bell. Read the names in front of every soul Pritchard ever bought feed for. Public truth is the one thing a man like him cannot refinance." Agnes smiled. Small. Sharp. "I do like you, Mr. Creed." So at full dark Dry Creek's fire bell began to hammer. Folks came in from supper tables and poker games and wash tubs. They gathered under lanterns in the square, while Bledsoe stood on the feed store steps with Caleb Dunn bound beside him. Agnes at one side, holding the copied pages. Mercy at the other with the 3 bottles wrapped in cloth like evidence from Scripture. Ezekiel Pritchard arrived exactly as Mercy knew he would. Not running, not disordered, but dressed in a black broadcloth coat with a silver watch chain and the expression of a man inconvenienced by lesser beings. Half the county owed him money. The other half owed him fear. "What is this nonsense?" he asked. Bledsoe answered by reading the first note aloud. A stillness spread so completely Mercy could hear harness leather creak at the back of the square. Then Agnes read the ledger entries. Then Mercy read her husband's name in a voice that did not shake. Pritchard went white only once, when Caleb shouted, "He told me to do it." The square broke open. Gasps. Shouts. A woman began to pray. Thomas Reed's brother pushed through the crowd looking like murder. Pritchard raised both hands, smooth even now. "These are fabrications. The widow has been unstable since her bereavement. Mr. Creed is a dismissed lawman with grudges and no standing. My foreman is under duress. He might have turned them if he had stopped there. Men like him always nearly did." But Mercy had one thing left. From inside her coat, she drew a final bottle stopper, thick with green glass around a sliver of waxed paper. She had found it lodged in the furnace ash after Eli's death. In the lined shack, while Jonah slept, she had warmed the glass at the lantern and teased the paper free with a hat pin. I wondered why my husband died on a road he never used, she said. Then I remembered he fixed your decanters the week before. She unfolded the paper. Here is a note from Judge Bellamy to Ezekiel Pritchard confirming payment received for replacement deeds concerning the Vale parcel and adjacent river allotments. Dated 2 days before Eli was killed. A noise moved through the crowd like wind catching dry grass. Pritchard's eyes shifted. For the first time all evening, he looked not grand but cornered. Jonah stepped forward then, not with a gun but with the plainness of a man done being silent. You can talk your way around one widow. You can buy one judge. You can frighten one sheriff. But you can't outshout your own books once the whole town has heard them. Thomas Reed's brother lifted his voice. I'll swear Thomas went to Pritchard's house the day before he vanished. Another man answered. He took my pasture on false interest. Then a woman near the livery called. My father signed with an X. That paper in the bank had a full signature. One by one the square turned. Not all at once. Courage spreads slower than fear. But it spreads. Bledsoe placed Pritchard under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to murder, and the unlawful seizure of property. Pritchard slapped his hand away and reached for the pistol under his coat. Mercy saw the motion before anyone. So did Jonah. But this time the victory belonged to who Mercy had become. She stepped into Pritchard's path and drove the heel of her hand into his wrist exactly the way she'd learned to snap punty from fresh-blown glass. Bone cracked. The pistol dropped. Sheriff Bledsoe kicked it away. 3 deputies seized Pritchard before his outrage could become anything else. The crowd did not cheer at first. They watched, almost reverent, as a powerful man discovered he was made of breakable parts after all. Then Agnes Shaw, bless that narrow, fierce widow, said, about time. Laughter broke the square wide open. By morning Judge Bellamy had fled and been caught at the South Bridge with 2 carpetbags, county seals, and more cash than a decent man could explain. The bank manager sang for leniency. Deeds were reviewed. Liens suspended. Families bent under Pritchard's boot began, slowly, to stand up straight. Mercy got her land back in law as well as fact. Thomas Reed's brother took possession of the north pasture. Samuel Pike's daughters were granted the claim Pritchard had swallowed after their father disappeared. Caleb Dunn, offered a choice between full confession and hanging with his employer, discovered a sudden devotion to honesty. As for Black Mesa, folks kept coming by Mercy's shed. Some to offer apology wrapped poorly in produce baskets. Some to bring bills owing. Some just to watch her work the pipe and gather molten glass like sunrise on iron. She let them watch. Let them see what hands like hers could make. Jonah stayed to help repair the back door he'd first walked through with a rifle. Then he stayed to mend the fence. Then, when there was no practical reason left, he still set his cup beside hers each morning as if it had found its place. One evening, while she shaped a new batch of bottles from river sand and ash, Jonah stood by the furnace and said, if I kept moving now, it would start to look suspiciously like cowardice. Mercy turned the glowing gather at the end of her pipe. And if I asked you to stay? I'd call that the first easy thing I've done in years. She smiled then, small and private. Good. I was beginning to think we'd have to suffer our way into old age. Weeks later, on the morning Pritchard's conviction came back from Santa Fe along with the order restoring every stolen parcel they could trace, Mercy hung a new sign above the shed door. Vale Glassworks. Below it, in smaller letters Jonah insisted were not too sentimental though she said they were, she painted, bottles for keeping what matters. In the first frost of autumn, Agnes married the bank manager's cousin. Thomas Reed's brother brought Mercy the first apples from reclaimed trees, and Dry Creek started saying Pritchard's name only when they needed an example for children about greed and what it costs. A year later, on a blue evening smelling of mesquite smoke, Mercy stood outside the shed while rows of finished bottles cooled on the shelf inside. Empty, honest, shining green in the last light. Jonah came up behind her carrying 2 cups of coffee and the old pewter horse on a cord around his neck, no longer hidden. He handed her a cup. Their shoulders touched easy as breathing. Down by the yard, a little girl from the Reed family chased fireflies with both hands open, and Mercy thought how strange it was that the heart could survive being broken and still make room enough for joy. The last of the sun held in the glass like a promise learning, at last, to keep itself. Next time, We'll tell the story of the seamstress everyone in town called plain until a wounded cattle buyer asked her to stitch his wedding coat for a bride who never arrived. And by the time the first snow melted, the whole county understood which heart had truly been waiting at the altar.